time after Napoleon and before the Crimean War was an invention-packed period, seeing many weapons we still use today. There was a concerned effort to return the mentality of an army to what it was before the revolutionary period, one of a private army owned by the monarch or ruler. Nationalism and militarism were stamped out either by propaganda or by force by the newly privatized army. The army now no longer represented the nation, nor was comprised mostly of volunteers. Army numbers were heavily cut. The technological inventions of the period marked the greatest advancement prior to the World Wars. During the 1830s, the percussion cap was introduced to the arsenal. This was a mercury-fueled detonator that would create a spark once struck, eliminating the need for a flintlock mechanism, thus reducing the 20% misfire rate during damp or windy weather to nearly zero. This new invention was used by the British Army during the Crimean War. The Dreyse rifle was invented in Prussia in the 1840s, revolutionizing the firepower of the infantry. These guns were breech-loading, meaning they were reloaded from near the trigger instead of through the muzzle, allowing for a 4.5 times faster reload rate. It also allowed for soldiers to take cover, fire and reload whilst lying down, as opposed to the muzzle-loading guns, which required standing up to reload. This invention had an initially slow uptake due to technical faults in production, and once resolved were used successfully by the Prussian army in the Prussian-Austrian War of 1866. In 1849, the Minié bullet was invented. This comprised of a smaller bullet with a lead base. The lead base would then expand on impact, gripping the size of the barrel and effectively increasing the range, accuracy and rate of fire of all guns, as they could be easily slotted in the breech or muzzle. The balance of power had now changed from offensive to defensive. As demonstrated in the Crimean War, the defensive troops had stronger weapons than the offensive. So far, artillery had remained the same throughout the entire period. In 1845, breech-loading rifled artillery had been invented, but they were too expensive to be taken up by the armies. However, during the Crimean War, the British rifled their artillery, and seeing the effectiveness of this at the siege of Sebastopol, the rest of Europe's armies adopted them. Possibly the most important inventions for military use were the railway system and the telegraph network. The steam train introduced in the 1830s meant rapid transport over a long distance, perfect for transporting army materials including ammunition and food. Surprisingly, troops were not transported using this method until the Franco-Austrian War of 1859. The telegraph network was established for civilian use in the 1840s and quickly seen as advantageous for the army. It allowed for the near instantaneous sending of Morse code messages over vast distances, allowing for a wider front line and a military base set far back, providing the physical network was there. It was not a perfect invention for communications, as runners, carrier pigeons, bugles, drums and flags were still used. Newspapers took advantage of the speedy information to print news as it happened back at home, increasing public awareness of the misery of war and the poor conditions the troops were living in at the front. It also put generals and commanders under the scrutiny of the public, as they now had to factor in public opinion for their tactics. If there were heavy losses during a battle, they would be accused of poor leadership. Communication using this method was still flawed, as seen in the charge of the Light Brigade, which shall, along with the Crimean War itself, be covered in the next video. Thank you for listening. Remember to thumbs up, comment and subscribe.